Carol retired at 58. Not because she was lucky. Not because she earned more than anyone else. She worked at the same insurance company for 29 years. Never made more than $67,000 in any single year. And when she handed in her badge, she had $1.4 million sitting quietly in accounts most of her coworkers did not know she had. Sandra retired at 67. Same company, same starting salary, same neighborhood. She had $94,000 and a storage unit full of furniture she could not fit in her new smaller apartment. Nobody noticed the difference while it was happening. That is the uncomfortable part, because from the outside, Sandra looked like the one who was winning. For 30 years, if nobody ever showed you what the retirement mistake actually looks like while you are still making it, stay with this video, because by the end, you are going to recognize something about your own habits that you will not be able to unsee. I study the behavioral gap between people who arrive at retirement with genuine freedom and people who arrive at retirement with regret they cannot afford to fix. And the gap almost never comes from income. It comes from something quieter, something that happens in the ordinary moments, in the grocery store, in the car dealership, in the split second before clicking add to cart. This is that story, Sandra. And Carol started the same year, same onboarding paperwork, same health insurance forms, same 401k enrollment package sitting in a manila envelope on their desks. Carol opened hers that evening. Sandra put hers in a drawer. Not because Sandra was irresponsible, because Sandra was tired, because the envelope looked boring, because there was a birthday dinner that Friday and she would deal with the envelope next week. Here is the part nobody wants to hear. The retirement mistake does not feel like a mistake when you make it. It feels like a reasonable postponement. It feels like one more thing you will get to when life settles down. And life never settles down. It just becomes more expensive. Move 1. The enrollment moment. Carol filled out the 401k form that same week. She chose 10% of her salary. She did not know exactly what she was doing. She just remembered something her father said once: pay yourself before you pay anyone else. Sandra enrolled 6 months later. She chose 3% because 3% felt manageable, because rent had just gone up, because her car needed new tires, because 10% felt like too much to give up right now. Show the difference. 2 jars, one filling at 10%, one filling at 3%. Let me show you what that one decision cost Sandra over 30 years. At $52,000 per year, 10% is $5,200 annually. 3% is $1,560 annually. The difference is $3,640 per year, invested at a 10% average annual return for 30 years. That $3,640 annual difference becomes approximately $598,000. $598,000. From a form Sandra put in a drawer for 6 months, and then filled out at 3% instead of 10%. Nobody noticed. Sandra did not notice. She was busy. But here is the part that matters. Carol was also busy. Carol also had rent going up. Carol also needed new tires. The difference was not their circumstances. It was the story they told themselves about what was possible right now. Sandra told herself, I will increase it later when I have more room. Carol told herself, this is the room. This is all the room there is. So I start here. That story, told quietly, to no one, was the first separation. Moved to the raise ritual. They both got raises in 1998. Sandra got $4,200 more per year. She celebrated. She deserved to celebrate. She had worked hard. She upgraded her apartment. Nicer neighborhood. $300 more per month. New furniture to fill the bigger rooms. A weekend trip she had been putting off. By the end of the year, the raise had been entirely absorbed. Her savings rate stayed exactly the same. Her lifestyle had grown to meet the new income before the income had a chance to compound. Carol got the same raise. She increased her 401k contribution by 2%, from 10.4% to 12%. She did not upgrade her apartment. She was not miserable in her current one. She bought a blue Tupperware set from a discount store and made lunches for work 4 days a week instead of 3. From the outside, nothing had changed for Carol. From the inside, everything had. This is where most people quietly lose the game, not in one catastrophic decision. In the raise ritual, the unconscious script that says, "I earned more, so I spend more," running in the background of every income increase for 30 years. Sandra ran that script every single time. Carol interrupted it, not dramatically, quietly. A 2% contribution increase, a blue Tupperware set. That was the second separation. Move 3. The car decision. Sandra walked into the dealership knowing she needed a reliable car for her commute. She walked out with a lease on a vehicle that cost $487 per month. It was beautiful. Leather seats, panoramic sunroof. She deserved it. She worked hard. She would definitely be making more money in 2 years when the lease renewed. Carol bought a 2001 Toyota Camry. Used. $8,400. She paid cash from money she had been keeping in a separate account labeled "Next Car." No monthly payment, no lease obligation, no insurance premium inflated by a vehicle worth 3 times more than necessary. The difference between Sandra's monthly payment and Carol's monthly payment, $487 per month, invested at 10% for 25 years, is approximately $614,000. Carol did not drive a beautiful car. She drove a paid-off car. For 25 years, she kept buying reliable used vehicles with cash, and the $487 per month that Sandra spent on payments, Carol spent on her future. Nobody in the office parking lot could tell which one was building wealth. That was the entire point. Move 4. The balance ritual. Sandra carried a credit card balance. Not a large one. $2,800 on average. It had been there for years. She paid the minimum each month and the extra when she could. The interest rate was 22%. She thought about paying it off constantly. She never quite got there. Something always came up. Here is what $2,800 at 22% interest actually costs over 10 years. The interest alone, without adding new purchases, is approximately $6,160. But here is the real cost, the psychological cost, the low-grade financial anxiety that comes from carrying a balance you mean to pay off, the background noise, the app refresh in the parking lot before a big purchase, the quiet calculation running every time you spend money. Sandra lived with that noise for 20 years. Carol paid her credit card in full every single month, not because she never wanted things she could not immediately afford, because she had built a rule before the emotion arrived that said the card is a transaction tool, not a borrowing tool, and the rule made the decision before the desire had a chance to override it. One rule, made once, before the emotion arrived. That was the 4th separation. Move 5. The lifestyle milestone. Both women were in their late 30s. Colleagues started buying houses in a neighborhood that had become fashionable. Sandra felt the pull. She felt it, the way you feel, something that is not quite desire, but is not quite fear either. She bought a house she could technically afford. The mortgage was 41% of her take-home income. The realtor had said she qualified. The bank had said she qualified. Technically, she did. Financially, she had just removed the margin between a stable month and a stressful one, the margin between an unexpected expense and a credit card charge, the margin between building wealth and managing obligations. Her lifestyle had reached its limit. And then the 2008 crash arrived. Sandra did not lose the house. She held on, but she could not invest during the crash. She had no margin. She watched the market drop 40% and thought only about the mortgage payment due on the 1st. Carol bought a smaller house in 2007. Her mortgage was 24% of her take-home income. When the crash came, she increased her 401k contribution because assets were on sale, because she had margin, because the margin had been the plan all along. Nobody knew she was doing this. The market recovered, and Carol's additional investments during the crash produced returns that compounded for the next 15 years. While Sandra spent those same 15 years slowly recovering the ground she had lost. That was the 5th separation. Move 6. The inevitable drain. Something changed around 2010. Shopping became frictionless. Sandra had always been a reasonable spender. Not reckless, not extravagant, just responsive. A sweater that appeared in her feed because an algorithm decided she would want it. A kitchen gadget that arrived in a cardboard box on a Tuesday she barely remembered ordering. Late-night Amazon boxes accumulating by the front door. Each purchase, $30, $45, $67 significant, all of them adding up to approximately $400 per month, $4,800 per year for 15 years. $4,800 per year at 10% average return over 15 years is approximately $158,000, not from one big mistake, from $45 purchases that felt like nothing. From the frictionless moment between wanting and having, that technology had reduced to a single tap. Carol still bought things online. She had a rule she had made years before the algorithm arrived. She added items to her cart. She waited 48 hours. Then she decided. Most items disappeared from the cart without her removing them. She had simply stopped wanting them. The 48-hour delay was not discipline. It was a system that made the decision before the emotion did. One system, made once. The 6th separation. Move 7. The first look. The retirement planning seminar in 2018. A financial advisor stood at the front of a conference room and showed a slide with 2 compound interest curves. Sandra sat in the back row. She looked at her projected retirement balance, and something happened in her chest that she could not fully name. It was not panic. It was something quieter. It was the first moment she had clearly seen. Not felt, not vaguely sensed, but clearly seen where 30 years of ordinary decisions had actually taken her. The number was not catastrophic. It was just smaller than the life she had been quietly planning for. Carol sat 3 rows ahead. She looked at her projected balance and felt something too. She felt almost exactly what she had expected to feel, because she had been running her own numbers for years, quietly, in a spreadsheet on her personal laptop, at the kitchen table, twice a year. Nobody had asked Carol to do this. No one told her to. She had decided, sometime in the early 2000s, that she would rather know the uncomfortable truth about her numbers than surprised by it later. Sandra had preferred not to know, until the seminar made not knowing impossible. That was the 7th separation. The inevitable move. Here is the deepest truth about everything you just watched. Carol never looked wealthy. Sandra looked wealthy for 30 years. Carol drove ordinary cars. Sandra drove beautiful ones. Carol made lunches in blue Tupperware containers. Sandra ate at the better restaurant 2 blocks from the office. Carol's apartment was comfortable. Sandra's apartment was impressive. And if you had watched them both from the outside every single year from 1994 to 2024, you would have assumed Sandra was the one building a life. But here is what was actually happening. Every dollar Sandra spent on the appearance of wealth was a dollar that never compounded. Every dollar Carol spent on the reality of future freedom was a dollar that grew quietly, invisibly, for decades. The wealthy person was performing less wealth, not because she was secretly miserable, not because she was denying herself, because she had asked, sometime very early, a question that Sandra had never quite gotten around to asking. What do I actually want my life to look like? At 58, and she had built every small decision, every contribution increase, every used car, every 48-hour pause, every raise not fully spent in the direction of that answer. Not dramatically, quietly, year after year, when nobody was watching, when there was nothing to post about, when the decision would never be seen by anyone else. That was the real move. The invisible one. Carol retired at 58. She did not make a speech about discipline or sacrifice. She said she was grateful. She hugged the colleagues she had worked with for nearly 3 decades. She drove home in a 2019 Honda Accord she had bought used 4 years earlier. She made dinner. She sat at the same kitchen table where she had run her numbers twice a year for 20 years. And she felt something she could not entirely explain to anyone who had not lived it. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter. The specific piece of arriving somewhere you have been building toward for a very long time. Sandra is still working. She is good at her job. She is not unhappy. But sometimes, in the parking garage at night, waiting for her phone to charge before driving home, she opens her banking app, and she sits with a number that is smaller than she expected. And she tries to remember exactly when the decisions that produced it were made. The answer is, they were made every day, in the ordinary moments. In the form she put in a drawer, in the raise she spent completely, in the car she leased instead of bought, in the balance she carried instead of cleared, in the purchases she never waited 48 hours on, in the numbers she preferred not to know. None of them felt like retirement decisions at the time. They just felt like Tuesday. Nobody noticed Carol getting rich. That was the entire point. Sandra looked wealthy for 30 years. Carol became wealthy for the rest of her life. The retirement mistake is not a single moment. It is not a catastrophic error. It is the accumulation of ordinary Tuesdays spent making decisions that feel completely reasonable, in service of an identity that feels completely normal, that quietly builds a future you did not choose. The difference between Sandra and Carol was never income. It was never luck. It was the question Carol asked herself at a kitchen table sometime in the late 1990s when nobody was watching. What do I actually want? And whether every small, invisible, ordinary decision was moving toward that answer or away from it. The difference between being stuck and being free is not income. It is behavior repeated quietly, over time.